When we think of the origins of Western literature, the name that most readily comes to mind is Homer, or Homeros as he was known in ancient Greece. For many, Homer represents the beginning, the fountainhead of poetry, myth, and narrative art. The Iliad and the Odyssey, monumental epics attributed to him, stand as foundational texts in the canon of ancient Greek and by extension, Western literature. But the figure Homer did not emerge from a void. He was the inheritor of a rich, vibrant, and largely forgotten oral tradition that spanned centuries and civilizations across the Mediterranean Sea. This is a story of the poets who came before Homer, whose names are little known today and whose works survive only in fragments, if at all. They were the bards and lyric poets whose voices once rang out in the courts of kings and among the crowds at festivals. Their legacy lives on, not only in Homer, but in the DNA of literature itself. The Mediterranean world of the 2nd millennium BCE was a melting pot of civilizations. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Egyptians along the Nile, and the Mesopotamians farther east had all developed systems of writing and complex literary traditions. However, in the Greek world, literacy did not take hold until around the 8th century BCE, well after many of the stories that would come to define its literature had already been circulating orally for generations. This oral tradition was maintained by Iodoi, singers of tales, who preserved history, myth, and social values through rhythmic, formulaic poetry. These poets did not read from texts, but performed from memory, relying on repeated phrases and narrative structures to aid recall. Homer therefore was likely the culmination of centuries of oral evolution. The epics attributed to him synthesized a vast body of mythic material and poetic convention that had developed among countless unnamed and forgotten poets. While the Iliad and the Odyssey are the best preserved Greek epics, they were only a part of what once was known as the epic cycle, a series of poems that recounted the full saga of the Trojan War and its aftermath. The full saga included works like the Cypria, the Aethiopis, and the Little Iliad. Note that not much is known about these works except for the names. These works are attributed to various authors such as Stasinus of Cyprus, Arctinus of Miletus, and Leches of Mytilene. These works also filled in the narrative gaps around Homer's epics. The events leading up to the Trojan War, the death of Achilles, the fall of Troy, and Odysseus' final adventures after returning home. Tragically, these poems survive only in summaries and scant quotations, mostly preserved in the writings of later scholars like Proclus. So, where do the Iliad and the Odyssey fit into the larger story? Well, the Iliad fits into this broader narrative as a deep exploration of just a single episode near the end of the Trojan War, more specifically the wrath of Achilles and its consequences. It does not tell the entire story of the war, but instead zooms in on a few critical weeks in the 10th year of the conflict. The Odyssey, on the other hand, focuses on the hero Odysseus' long and troubled journey home after the fall of Troy, a theme also touched upon in the lost poem Nostoi, Returns. Together, these two epics offer only a partial view of the full mythic tradition that once existed. They became canonical because of their depth, complexity, and artistic power, but they were once just a part of a much larger and interconnected mythological universe. Now, why did these epics disappear? Well, the reasons are complex. With the rise of literacy, a few texts, particularly those attributed to Homer, were canonized and copied repeatedly, while others fell into obscurity. Basically, the advent of written literature created a filter through which only certain voices were preserved. The transmission of ancient literature was precarious. Works that were not continually copied by hand risked being lost to time, war, or changing tastes. Fires, invasions, and religious censorship all played roles in the disappearance of texts. Even in the cases where names and titles survive, the actual poetry has vanished. To study the writers who came before Homer is to reclaim a broader, more inclusive history of literature. These poets, though obscured by time, shaped the aesthetics, moral frameworks, and narrative structures that continue to influence storytelling today. They remind us that literature is not the work of isolated geniuses, but the cumulative voice of a culture, echoed and re-echoed across generations. In recovering even fragments of their work, we hear those echoes once more, faint but undeniable.